I didn't really know what to expect when it came to Immortals of Aveum. Like many of you, I watched the pre-release gameplay footage leading up to like the Summer Games Fest and all the marketing that they were really pushing behind this game. They had some high-profile actors and actresses in there, and graphically the game was using a lot of the core features of Unreal Engine 5. So at least from a technical front, you could at least look forward to the type of stuff that was being used. It was cutting edge, so to speak. But this was a AA project from EA, of all developers, and a single-player only game, which doesn't really sound like the EA that we know. So I was kind of lukewarm on the game, to be quite honest. And seeing the gameplay, to me, it just looked like it was kind of all over the place. Lots of particles in your face, tons of stuff happening on screen that it was kind of hard to make out exactly what you were supposed to do. And I was just sitting here not really knowing what to expect. Well, I have to say, I beat the entire campaign of Immortals of Aveum on Xbox Series X. 30 hours worth of a story, by the way. And man, I really enjoyed this game, just to be quite honest with you guys. In fact, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. And I would describe this definitely as a sleeper hit for 2023. There's a lot to unpack here when it comes to Immortals, so I want to break everything down. We're going to talk about the technical end of it. I'll get into the story and at least give you an idea of what's happening here. And then most importantly, the gameplay. Does it actually play well, or is this game kind of just a massive mess with all these pretty particles and lighting effects in your face? Well, it's like half and half, I would say. A lot of stuff here is actually really good. In fact, most of the game is fairly solid. I'll just say this right up front, is that the game, for what it is, I feel is a pretty polished experience. There are some bugs and little glitches here and there, and I did run into one crash with the game. However, they've actually updated the game during my playthrough here, and when they updated it, they fixed a lot of the technical issues that I was kind of having with the experience. So I'll get into that a little bit later here, but let me just give you the gist of basically what Immortals is about. The best way I can describe this game, you've seen some people say this is Call of Duty but with spells, or this is Ghostwire Tokyo but more of an action game than something that's more exploration and hub-based. And really, I would say that neither of those two really, I think, closely describes the experience. This is a first-person shooter, all right? It is a action-focused game. You are casting spells. You'll never pick up a weapon or any type of, other stuff within the environment. You're going to constantly be casting spells, and you have 3 different types of spells. These spells range from everything from that handles more kind of like as a rifle, one that handles more like a shotgun, and then another one that handles more like an assault rifle or a machine gun or something like that, right? So the spells themselves are familiar in the way that they behave to some type of ballistic weapons, but there's different types of spells within these 3 different types, these archetypes, so to speak. And depending on the type of spells or what you want to equip within these archetypes, you can have them behave drastically different. So, that machine gun spell that I was describing before, you can have that be a slower fire rate, but with homing projectiles rather than something that's just kind of throwing in a bunch of orbs at an enemy or something like that. So there's different types of spells here that are on offer, and there's different variances for each spell. And basically the way that you'll be learning this as you play the game, but different spells help you depending on the type of situation and what type of enemy that you're facing as well. I spent a significant amount of time in this game because it is hub-based. This actually does have a good exploration element to the game, where the levels are kind of laid out as hubs, and you head to your objective. While you're on your way to your objective, you'll fight enemies. You'll also come across different puzzles or different areas that are outside, let's say, the realm of where you're supposed to be going. And so you kind of have to figure out, how do I get over there? And when you get over there, you might find things like a chest, which will unlock basically different spell types. You might have different, you have like this sigil, they call it, and it's basically this like ring or this type of tool that attaches to your character's arm and basically allows them to equip different types of magic. And depending on the sigil that you have selected, you might do more damage, higher fire rates, more ammo count, stuff like that. So you might find different sigils, all right, different types of essentially cosmetic weapon types that allow you to have different variances with the spell that you're casting. So there is actually a purpose for going out of your way and doing this, because if you want the game to, you know, I would say if you want to feel progressively more powerful, you have to actually explore, and you'll come across things like puzzles throughout the environment that you can solve that will get you you know, these types of sigil upgrades. And in addition to that, you'll also come across challenge rooms, and you'll have to maybe defeat a wave of enemies. Sometimes these challenge rooms are just about you know, traversal and platforming and stuff like that, and so you have to kind of make it to the end of the environment while the rooms are kind of shifting around. To be honest, I actually had a good time kind of going out of my way here and trying to solve a lot of the puzzles, because some of them are actually really well done. They're not overly hard, but they're also not too easy to the point where they get boring. You kind of have to look around, and again, different spells will allow you to get to different parts of the environment, so you have to kind of, you know, match the color of what you're looking for with the spell that you have equipped. So it's a fairly straightforward system when it comes to that. You'll also be revisiting these levels later on, so there's a lot of these hubs. I would say there's about a dozen total in the game, maybe a little bit less, but you'll be revisiting these levels also throughout the story. As you unlock more tools, you'll also unlock the ability to go back to these levels and get to different areas. Sometimes the story will take you back to those levels anyway, and so, you know, while you're there, you might come across that room or that cave that you couldn't get into before. Now you have the tool to go ahead and solve the puzzle and get into that room, which might net you a more powerful upgrade, a new accessory that you might equip, which may give you a buff. You know, there's actually a reason to go out and explore this environment, and throughout my 30-hour experience, I basically nearly 100%ed the entire game, going back to these levels, and I did all of the optional challenge rooms. I believe they're called Shroud Fanes or something like that within the game. There's some, you know, really difficult ones. There's 6 in particular that will actually net you a trophy or achievement for doing them, and they're extremely difficult, and you have to fight some of the toughest bosses in the entire game, but they will also give you the most powerful weapons throughout the game. By the end of my 30-hour experience, in fact, it was just a little bit before the end, I got to play through a good third of the game feeling so powerful that literally nothing could stop me. Like, we're talking like major story bosses I was able to defeat in like a minute, and the random guys that would spawn across and you would have to engage combat with while you're walking to your objective, like 2 hits and they'd be instantly killed. So I have to say that when you start the game off, you know, you're gonna kind of get used to the way that the combat feels, but towards the end of it, if you spend time unlocking and doing all these puzzles and getting all this cool stuff, you're gonna feel basically unstoppable, and it makes the game feel pretty cool because you'll be able to do a lot more spells, but also a lot more special abilities, and you'll be taking out waves of people in a matter of seconds. And it's pretty freaking awesome, I have to say. So I like the combat of this game. Once I got used to it, once I got into the flow of the actual game, I walked away pretty happy with my experience. I wouldn't really describe this though as Call of Duty without the guns and spells. I would describe this more so as a game that embodies elements from like Doom 2016, like more fast-paced, more kind of on the edge of your seat. You're kind of moving a lot as you're doing these spell castings. In fact, the game doesn't really lend itself much into the platforming and the shooting and the constant movement based combat that Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal has, but it feels like this game could progress into that, you know, if it makes sense. A lot of times, you know, you'll have enemies coming at you from different directions, and there's stuff like grapple points in the environment that you can swing yourself across, and so you kind of have to get around enemies. Some of them will charge you immediately, some hang back and throw grenades at you. And so, you know, you have to kind of move around constantly throughout the environment, and you do have a shield spell as well at your disposal. You can also shoot while the shield is held up. So you have defensive maneuvers here, but mostly you're going to be on your feet constantly as you're casting these spells. And this brings me to my first main criticism when it comes to the combat. There is really no aim assist in this game. There's aim magnetism, similar to like Halo, where depending on where you're shooting, sometimes the spells will veer in the direction of the enemies. You do have certain spells that are actually like homing missiles almost, that actually do go towards the people you're trying to shoot, but for the ones that don't, they still have a level of magnetism attached to them so that you actually hit them. You hit the enemies even though you might not be aiming at them perfectly. However, it's very light, and to be honest, there's no lock-on system when it comes to this game. Most of the time when you want to hit an enemy, you have to turn, face them, and make sure the reticle is constantly pointing at them, and they might be moving around and jumping around as well. And certain enemies have weak points attached to them too. So you might want to shoot the head constantly, because for that enemy, it might be a weak point. If you're fighting like a monster or a beast, sometimes that weak point is like, you know, their neck below their head. It's other parts of their body. So there's actual weak points that you're going to want to hit, and you have to kind of find out as you're engaging in combat here. But yeah, I feel almost like this game would be a little bit better if I could lock onto enemies, almost like if there was a lock-on aiming system. Where if you just hold down one of the triggers, it just hones in on like an enemy that you're looking at, and that way you can move around, you can just shoot, and you don't have to constantly move your reticle. The aim assist in this game is very light, so there is some challenge there, and it does kind of encourage you to get kind of up close and personal with a lot of the enemies, because you'll have an easier time hitting them. But that is something I would like to see in a possible sequel to this game, if they are going to actually make this a franchise and continue on with it. The second criticism I have is when it comes to the actual spell switching. You have three archetypes of spells that kind of mimic weapons, like guns and stuff like that. You have your rifle, you have your shotgun, and you have like your automatic, you know, machine gun, assault rifle, whatever you want to call it. So those are like the three types of spells, and within those spells are different subtypes that might change the way that the projectiles shoot, how fast they shoot, the damage that they do, how many, you know, spells you have in that particular clip, so to speak. So the problem is that when you have to switch spells, maybe you're facing off against a particular enemy that is weak towards one particular spell than the other, there is no quick selection screen. Your solution to this is that you have to constantly push Y until your character lands on the spell that you're trying to equip. And so as you're doing this, it's switching between the three different spells constantly, and there's no way for you to bring up like a weapon wheel or like a quick selection screen. And so, like, you know, if you tap Y once and you want to get to, like, let's say you're on spell number 1 and you want to get to spell number 3, you have to tap Y to switch to spell number 2, then tap Y again to switch to spell number 3. And it's not like intuitive where if you double tap it, it automatically goes to that third spell. You have to wait for it to load, and then wait for it to change, and wait for it to change again in order for that you know, prompt to actually register. And if you hold Y, nothing happens. So I really feel like they need to add a quick selection screen to the spells that you're shooting, because when you have to navigate between three different spells and you only have one button to switch between them, you're just cycling through basically spells that, you know, you don't want to use. And I actually had this problem throughout my entire playthrough, is that, you know, you get better with it as you progress more through the game. You understand the order that it's switching in, because that never changes. But yeah, you have to kind of wait for the game or wait for the spell to equip before you can start shooting. And if you had like a quick selection wheel, or if you hold down Y, you can just immediately, you know, click on what you want to select, and then it loads that, and maybe it slows down the game as you're in like that weapon wheel, for instance, kind of like Doom 2016. If you had something like that, it would make switching off between these spells so much easier. And unfortunately, there's just nothing like that in this game. So what is here is a very solid foundation for, I think, a competent shooter that is more focused on spell casting than actual weapons. You're never going to pick up any weapons or anything like that, but again, different spells mimic different types. So there are spells where you throw projectiles, and there are spells where you actually shoot things. There are spells that kind of home in on enemies from a distance. There's different variances here, and there's a lot of different ones as well. It's not just like, you know, one or two. You have a really good number of different spells here, and as you if you do the puzzle solving and do all the side stuff, you'll unlock more of these. So it kind of encourages you to go out of your way and do this stuff, because you might unlock something that is a lot more advantageous to your type of gameplay style, depending on, you know, how you're playing the actual game. So from that, let's segue into the story really quickly. I don't want to give this too much away because this is a very story-focused game. There's a lot of cutscenes in here. And I actually enjoyed this story for what it was. Now, you're following your main character here, Jack, who's basically what they call a triarch. He's capable of casting all three different spell types, which is great for gameplay, but he's, you know, a special type of person. It follows some similar story tropes when it comes to that type of stuff. But there's actually a lot here, and I was kind of impressed by the fact that, you know, although this game gets a little bit lore heavy and kind of just thrusts you into this world and doesn't do a lot of explaining, I did like being a part of this world. There's a lot of political stuff that is happening that is pretty interesting. There's an ongoing, you know, large scale war that they call the Ever War in this game, and basically whoever wins it would gain control of all magic possible. So you have basically the main enemy of the game fighting, you know, with your team, the Immortals, who are kind of like the elite force, going after the villains, trying to save or basically just control all magic so that they can, you know, prevent the end of the world. That's basically what's going on here. Seems a little bit convoluted, seems a little bit tropey, I know, but again, this is something that I think it's inoffensive. I don't think this story is going to win any rewards here. I don't think it's going to be particularly super memorable, but I enjoyed listening to the cutscenes. All of the characters on display, the acting in this game is fantastic. They have a lot of great actors and actresses in here. You know, people that you might have seen from television shows and movies and all that type of stuff, and they do a very, very good job, you know, telling their lines and stuff like that. The main character, Jack, is okay. He grew on me the more I played the game. He's kind of similarly written to what's her name in Forspoken, which might be a turnoff to a lot of you guys who are hearing me right now because of how bad Forspoken's dialogue and storytelling was. But unlike Forspoken, they don't overdo it in this game. He's just kind of like a jackass. He has kind of a big ego, but it's not to the point where it's super annoying. And for me, you know, I enjoyed the dialogue because some of it was genuinely well written, some of it was genuinely funny. But, you know, you do have to contend with the fact that this is a character here that, you know, knows he's special and kind of acts in a way that is befitting to someone who's egotistical of that. At the same time, his character really grew on me towards the end. He's not a complete jackass. He doesn't take everything as a complete joke. He does have a reason for being there, an emotional reason for being there. And you could tell he does honestly care about doing the right thing. So I enjoyed Jack as a character. Again, I just think that the game's a bit inoffensive, where it's not going to be particularly memorable after you play it, but you are going to have at least a good time during your playthrough of the game, watching the story unfold. There's some twists and turns and some stuff that even I didn't see coming, and even the villain and the side characters as well. They do a really good job of making sure everyone's conveying their lines properly depending with what's going on. So no one seems really out of place. I enjoyed the villain. I enjoyed, all the people that you kind of got to interact with in the game. Unfortunately, the game does do this thing where they introduce a bunch of characters that really serve no purpose to the story, and you never really got a proper introduction for. So during this game, you have like a main, we'll call it like a safe zone, for instance. And it's basically an area where you can upgrade your gear. You have like your own, like your bedroom and your place is there, and you basically interact with all of the characters in the game. They're all kind of sitting there in the lobby, and you can go up to them and talk to them, and you have dialogue choices, and you can just find out more details about the world and sort of the other stuff that's happening in the background of the main story that you're actually going through. A lot of those characters that they introduced are people that you've never met before in the game, but somehow Jack knows. And they're not really ever utilized in the story. They have a tendency to show some really cool characters, some really interesting characters that are their design is pretty cool. They are formidable, apparently. At least the game tries to convey that in its story, that they're really powerful people. But you never see a scene with them. The game never really develops them, and your only relationship with them from a gameplay perspective is having some dialogue options where you can ask them questions to get a little bit more of a backstory of them and, again, the world that you inhabit. And so, that stuff is kind of wasted. I feel that, they could have done a better job incorporating those characters, maybe even have less characters, but are just more meaningful. When it comes down to it, only about 5 characters, honestly, out of like the 10 or whatever that are in the game, are actually useful to the story and that show up prominently throughout the main narrative. The rest are kind of just in the background, and you have story options. But hey, if you talk to them all, you'll get a trophy and achievement, and that gives you a lot of gamer points and is responsible for a big chunk of the trophies in the game. So the last couple things I want to touch upon are the graphics as well as the music in the game. I'll start off with the music since, I only have a couple things to say about this. I enjoyed the music for this game, at least part of the music for this game. It's got one of those soundtracks that's kind of always playing in the background. It gets a little bit superhero-ish, towards the big heavy action sequences. But the real killer for me when it comes to the sound is the actual music that's playing when you're just exploring the world. Oddly enough, I got a lot of like Mirror's Edge vibes with the music of this game, which is bizarre if you look at it, because it's kind of like it's a science fiction meets fantasy world that leans more on the fantasy element, but there is technology in here. But they got like a lot of music when you're just exploring the world that's kind of it feels weirdly detached from what you're seeing, but it's very calming to listen to. I enjoyed the music when those parts were happening. The other times it was, again, just happening in the background, and I didn't really think too things of it. But I think the music in this game was pretty decent for what it was. I will say that it's not something I'm going to buy the soundtrack for, but I could have thought of worse. Some games don't even play any music when you're walking around and exploring. If you're gonna play some music, if you're gonna be reminiscent of Mirror's Edge, and I'm not just saying that, there's a lot of weird tracks that are kind of like that are electronic but very kind of mellow. If you think of like the calming music in Mirror's Edge before the action heats up, when you're just kind of puzzle solving or kind of running around, sort of that background music, it kind of feels like that's kind of how this game sounds. I don't know, a bit weird, because I wasn't really expecting that, and it feels tonally separate from the rest of the game, but hey, at least it's calming to listen to, so there's that. Now I'll talk about the graphics. This game is one of the first games, if not, I think, the first commercial game to use Unreal Engine 5, and more specifically, Unreal Engine 5 with a lot of its core features. There is no ray tracing in the game because it runs at a target 60 FPS, and I'll get to the frame rate in a little bit because unfortunately that's a critique I have. But this game is one of the first games to use Unreal Engine 5 and specifically its Lumen technology, which is the new lighting tech that we saw with, the Matrix Awakens demo and stuff like that. I think the detail of this game is outstanding. The character, all the cutscenes in the game, by the way, at least 99.9% of them, are actual in-game renderings. So that's awesome because the game is actually rendering those cutscenes and the characters look very lifelike. Even outside of the cutscenes, there's good animation when it comes to the character. Now, Lumen is interesting because it's basically giving you an effect that's like ray tracing, but I think without the performance costs. But it's also not saying much because, this game doesn't really do a good job hitting its target frame rate, unfortunately. But what this basically means is that every single detailed object in the game, every little speck, every crevice, every tiny rock, every blade of grass, everything has a shadow attached to it. And when you're just walking around the environment and you look at the floor and there's all these little rocks that are on the ground and just, rubble, trash, whatever the case may be, leaves, whatever's on the ground, if it's 3D geometry, it has a shadow attached to it. Doesn't matter how small, how microscopic. This also comes into play when you have ambient occlusion as well, because what Lumen does is it realistically calculates how lighting is supposed to behave with all of these objects on screen, as well as in close proximity to one another, which is what ambient occlusion would normally do. Now, the negative side of this whole thing is that none of the lighting is dynamic, meaning that there is no time of day when it comes to this game. Every time you visit one of these locations, it will always be, whatever the artists decide the time of day is going to be. And they don't even change it up later on in the storyline. So if you get to a level and it's daytime, it's going to be perpetually stuck in daytime throughout the entirety of the game experience. I'm okay with that. It didn't bother me, but I could see with Lumen where they're using this tech. Clearly, I don't know if this was a concession that they made or whatnot. Maybe this was a limitation, but all the lighting in the game is static. Your spells, I don't even think your spell casting is dynamic either, but there is, appropriate light balance when it comes to all this stuff. Everything that would normally be handled by something with an ambient occlusion pass or global illumination pass, ray tracing, is all handled by Lumen in this game. I think the lighting is appreciable, and I really like the detail. When you look for the detail of where Lumen should be, and even the way that like a mountain cliff is designed, if there's like a boulder sticking out a little bit of a ways and there's a little shadow that should be in between where that indentation is, it's casting a shadow. It's as realistic as it possibly could be when it comes to the lighting of that game. Now, here's some negatives I have to say about the graphics. All right, detail wise, I think everything looks really good. But that comes with a large caveat. Now, I'll talk about the frame rate in a bit, but there's actually a larger issue here outside of the frame rate that really bothered me enough, and the only fix to this was changing a console level setting. This game upscales to a what is supposed to be a native 4K presentation on your console. So if you're playing this on PS5 or Xbox Series X, the game doesn't run in 4K, but outputs to that resolution and uses AMD FSR2 to upscale to that resolution. Now, FSR2 is a decent upscaler. It doesn't work as well as DLSS, but it's much better than FSR1, which is what Final Fantasy XVI used, and other games like Star Wars Jedi use, I believe, as well. But there's a big issue here, and it's the fact that the game upscales from a base resolution of 720p native to 4K. Now, I don't care how good your upscaler is, but 720p trying to look 4K immediately falls apart. This game had an egregious issue here, where basically the image would break apart and mesh up, and this basically looked like there was no aliasing applied. Whenever you turn the camera, you would see the pixelization in the image. The game would start to flicker excessively. Parts of the image itself would just break up and look mushy. And when you finally turn the camera and look at what you wanted to look at and you just stay stationary, then the detail appears, and it takes about a couple seconds for that to resolve. This is a major issue, and I understand that we're right now in the realm where base resolution doesn't necessarily matter. DLSS has been great for the gaming industry, great for PC specifically, but you know, we've even had stuff like checkerboard rendering. Like, upscaling to a higher resolution is not new to the industry, even on console. But man, the solution that they have here in place is poor. It is so bad that it was distracting when it came to the actual gameplay, because the art direction doesn't necessarily help either. You get a lot of natural environments, but there's a lot of foliage on screen. Some of the environments, they have like this special kind of they call it like the shadow realm. It's like a different world within the world, and you know, they have different objects that are kind of like squared away. It's like different pillars that are attached to one another, and when you're just moving around in that area, it's just like all this flickering from the aliasing that is going on. I play a lot of older games. I played 7th gen games, 6th gen games. Like, I play older games that I'm used to seeing, you know, 720p and lower resolutions on screen, you know? So I understand how these games used to look, and it's not that the resolution itself bothers me, it's the upscaler that can't do anything, because the quality of the game, the base resolution of the game is so low that it can't possibly make up as much detail to fit a 4K screen. There is a fix for this though, and it was thanks to the Digital Foundry review where I actually discovered this myself, because I was complaining about it for 2 days on Twitter. I just, like, every single time I tried to play the game, I was just distracted by this, and it really became an issue. Set your console to 1080p, because it still upscales the game from 720p, but it dynamically switches the FSR from ultra performance mode at 4K to FSR2 quality mode at 1080p. And 720p trying to look 1080p looks a hell of a lot better than 720p trying to look 4K. And when I switched my console to output in 1080p and just let my TV do the upscaling to 4K, oh my god, it made such a significant difference. It didn't completely fix the issue, right? There was still a bit of flicker and a bit of aliasing when the camera moved around, but man, it was so much less noticeable, and it actually made the game so much more playable for me. I played through the entirety of this game with my Series X at a 1080p output, because otherwise I would have had to deal with severe aliasing and pixel breakup and just constant, you know, fluctuations in the image. It looked really awful, and out of all the games I've seen with the upscaler, or with this particular upscale, and just also other ones, because I've used and seen DLSS on PC, I've seen FSR2 used on PC, we've seen FSR1 used on other console games. We just had Final Fantasy 16, which uses FSR1 to upscale to its resolution, and even that game was using, you know, a lower resolution, but it's not trying to look 4K. It's trying to output to something like 1440p, which just looks a little bit better. But setting my console to 1080p really helped make the game playable to me. If I didn't do that, and if you guys who play the game don't do that, which is why I'm really recommending that you do, unless they fix this in a patch somehow, but in its current state, this is what you have to do. It is a requirement to really enjoy this game at somewhat acceptable image quality levels. All right, it is really, really that bad, and it is the worst game. It is the worst upscaled game I've seen in motion for any of these console titles. And there is no 30 FPS mode in this game. You have to play in its default only mode, which just basically gives you a 720p upscaled resolution, but at 60 frames per second. Unfortunately, you would think that running at 720p, such a low resolution for today's games, you would think that that would help alleviate all of the issues with performance. It does not. This game does not hit a constant 60 FPS, and quite honestly runs consistently in like the mid 50s and even the mid 40s at times. Now thankfully on the Series X it supports AMD FreeSync, and I was able to use FreeSync, and because I'm playing at a lower resolution I also have low frame rate compensation, because the range at 4K is a lot lower for FreeSync than it is 1080p. And honestly, FreeSync took care of all of the performance issues and the stutters that I was seeing in this game. So the only way I was able to actually play this game with acceptable image quality and acceptable performance was due to me downscaling the resolution of my console at 1080p and using AMD FreeSync to iron out basically any of the frame rate dips that I was experiencing. It was the only way I could actually comfortably play this game with decent image quality and no stutters. And FreeSync, if it wasn't for FreeSync, even with the image quality issues being mostly dealt with a 1080p output, I would have still got severe stuttering, and the game would have still looked slightly blurry because I'm playing at a lower resolution. So you really need those two things. I think technically, on a gameplay front, it's polished in terms of there being very few bugs. I had one crash in the game, but that was due to, I think personally, the Xbox quick resume feature, because the game crashed basically when I went to boot the game after having it in quick resume, and it just immediately went back to the menu. It didn't even give me a reason. But I restarted the game. It has an excellent quick save feature, and I was able to just get right back into it without any progress lost. So, it was just that one instant crash. Everything else was fine. There wasn't even that many bugs either. Sometimes there's traversal issues where, your characters, when he's standing in a certain spot, he won't, there's like invisible walls, or there's something where your character can't climb up certain surfaces. But that was also me trying to, explore and get around, trying to have to do things probably the proper way. So I'm not even going to chalk that up to the game's fault. But in order to play this game in its current state, I will say, you need to have your console set to 1080p, and you need to have a TV capable of a wide FreeSync range, even at 1080p where I got low frame rate compensation. If it wasn't for that, basically, if it wasn't for a combination of me doing that, then I would have got severe stutter, even with the general FreeSync range that this game has. So, that alone, I think, might urge a lot of you guys to wait on playing it, at least those of you who are interested. And to be honest, at the end of the day, I have to say I would recommend this game. I had a good time with Immortals of Aveum. I just played Atlas Fallen before this game, and Atlas Fallen was absolute garbage. I hated the entire experience all the way through. I wanted it to end immediately after starting, and I got through that game in 15 hours, even trying to do the side missions and trying to get that game to at least open up or give me something that was decent in that experience. There's a lot here I really enjoyed with Immortals of Aveum. The gameplay was a surprisingly, fun and engaging combat system that played or had systems similar to something like Doom 2016 and other shooters. The graphics, the detail level was at least decent enough, but yes, once I settled for a 1080p output, which didn't bother me really, it's just slightly more blurrier, and because the game's running lower than 1080p anyway, you're not losing anything in the way of raw detail when it comes to the image. So you gotta play it in that perspective. But I enjoyed the story, I enjoyed the combat for the game, and I enjoyed being a part of this world, and I feel that this is a decent sleeper hit that is worth your time. I got 30 hours out of this main story, and that was me basically doing 95% of everything that the game had to offer, like a lot of stuff. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, I absolutely would recommend this as just a fun kind of pick me up and play title. The best thing I could say about this game, honestly, is that it's an EA game that doesn't feel like an EA game. It doesn't have microtransactions, it doesn't have tacked on multiplayer. There's nothing here like, you know, that is offensive in any single way to the experience, or that, you know, tries to nickel and dime you for like the smallest little inconsistency. It doesn't feel like an EA game to me, but EA published it, and for what it's worth, I had a really good time with the game once I settled and resolved all of those technical issues, which I was just fortunate enough to do. So just make sure you do that, and I think the game is you're gonna have a good time with it. You know, if you go in with those expectations, and it sounds like something that what I just described sounds like something that you guys would be interested in experiencing. All right. So that's it. I'm actually happy I played Immortals. I would like to see another one from this studio. I feel that this could be a potentially cool series, and something that does channel, again, Doom 2016, just in a different light. I like the characters for what they, you know, what they showed, and I enjoyed the story, although it's not particularly memorable. And even the music I had a good time with, and again, the graphics I felt were, you know, it looked very, very good when the game allowed itself to look good. That's what I'll say. So yes, I'm recommending Immortals of Aveum, and I hope for many of you, even though that, you know, I'm sure this game will go on sale quite soon. You know, I feel like EA kind of pushed this game out to die. It came out in the worst possible time, right before Starfield. This is not how you want to release a game, but if you see it for 20-30 bucks in the bargain bin, absolutely it is worth that price, and you'll have a really good time playing it if it sounds like what I described to you in this video is of any interest. All right, thank you guys for watching this review. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good day.